I told my family I was bankrupt during Sunday dinner, and my daughter-in-law laughed right in my face. The sound still echoes in my head 3 weeks later. Sitting here in my study, looking at the family photo from happier times, I wonder how everything went so wrong. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, if you've ever questioned whether love has conditions, pull up a chair. This story's gonna sting, but it's got to be told. And if you're someone who believes actions speak louder than blood, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got more truths to share than time left to tell them. The dining room that evening was perfect, like always. Crystal glasses catching the chandelier light, my late wife Margaret's china, set carefully arranged by our housekeeper Rosa. The mahogany table she'd picked out 40 years ago still gleamed, hosting another family gathering that felt more like a board meeting than a reunion. My son James sat stiff as a poker, checking his phone between courses. Sarah, my daughter, barely touched her food, eyes darting to the clock every few minutes. Diana, James's wife, kept adjusting her new diamond bracelet, making sure everyone noticed it. Only little Tommy, my 8-year-old grandson, seemed genuinely happy to be there. He'd been telling me about his baseball practice, his eyes bright with excitement. "Grandpa, did you know I hit 3 home runs this week?" he'd said, and for a moment the room felt warm again. But then Diana shushed him, claiming the adults were trying to talk. What adults? What conversation? We were all just sitting there going through the motions of being a family. Marcus had driven me to the house that evening, same as he had for 15 years. We'd talked about the weather, about his daughter starting college, about anything except the hollow feeling in my chest. He'd opened my door, same gentle smile he always wore, and said, "Have a good dinner, Mr. Robert. I'll be right here when you're ready." I should have stayed in that car. Should have asked him to just drive us somewhere, anywhere but into that beautiful, cold dining room. The idea hit me somewhere between the appetizer and the main course. Maybe it was Diana's comment about needing a bigger vacation house, or James mentioning his plans to expand his law firm without asking for my advice. Maybe it was Sarah's request for another loan for her art gallery that was bleeding money. They talked around me, not to me, like I was furniture that happened to write checks, so I decided to test something. I decided to see what would happen if the checks stopped coming. Looking back now, I realize I was hoping to be wrong. I was hoping they'd rally around me, offer support, show some concern for their old man facing hard times. I was hoping that beneath all the requests for money and the awkward silences, there was still some love left. But hope, I learned that night, can be the cruelest emotion of all. Because when you hope for the best from people and get their worst instead, it doesn't just disappoint you, it changes you forever. It wasn't always like this, you know. There was a time when James would call me just to talk, when Sarah would bring her boyfriends around for my approval, when family dinners meant laughter instead of awkward silences. Margaret used to say our home was like a magnet for happiness. People gravitated here, stayed for hours, left feeling better than when they arrived. Those days feel like someone else's memories now. James was 12 when I taught him to drive my old pickup truck in the back field behind our first house. We'd spend Saturday mornings out there, him gripping the wheel with white knuckles, me trying not to flinch when he hit every pothole. "Dad," he'd say, "when I grow up, I want to have a business just like yours." Those words kept me working 18-hour days for years. Every contract I signed, every deal I closed, I thought about that little boy who wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. Sarah was different, always the artist. She'd sit in my office while I worked, drawing pictures of our family on the backs of important documents. Margaret would scold her, but I kept every single drawing. There's one of me wearing a crown, titled "My King Daddy" in crayon. She was maybe 6 years old then, all gap-toothed smiles and wild imagination. When she told me she wanted to open an art gallery, I didn't hesitate to help. Art was her passion, and I wanted to give her every chance to succeed. The money changed things gradually. Then, all at once, my construction company grew from 3 employees to 300. We went from fixing neighbors' porches to building shopping centers across 3 states. Margaret and I tried to keep the kids grounded, but wealth has a way of shifting everything. Private schools, expensive cars, vacations that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. I told myself I was giving them opportunities I never had, but maybe I was just making it easier for them to forget where they came from. Margaret saw it happening before I did. "Robert," she'd say, during those last years before the cancer took her, "you're trying to buy their love, and they're letting you." I argued with her, defended the kids, said she was being too harsh. But late at night, when she was sleeping, I'd wonder if she was right. Were they calling because they missed me, or because they needed something? Was Sunday dinner about family, or just another opportunity to ask for financial help? After Margaret died, the requests became more frequent and more desperate. James needed money for his divorce lawyer when his first marriage fell apart. Sarah needed funding for gallery shows that never seemed to turn a profit. When James married Diana 2 years later, the requests doubled. Suddenly, it wasn't just my children asking for help. It was their spouses too, as if marrying into the family came with automatic access to the family bank account. I said yes to everything, hoping that generosity would bridge the growing distance between us. But every check I wrote seemed to push them further away instead of bringing them closer. The warning signs were subtle at first, like cracks in a foundation that you don't notice until the whole house starts shifting. Diana entered our family like a tornado, wrapped in designer clothes, and James was completely mesmerized. Their wedding cost more than my first house, and she made sure everyone knew it. "Only the best for the Hartwell family," she'd say, as if she'd been born into money instead of married into it. The Sunday dinners started feeling different after Diana joined us. She'd arrive with a mental list of improvements needed for our lifestyle. A bigger house in the right neighborhood, a country club membership, private school for Tommy when he was barely out of diapers. Every suggestion came wrapped in concern for the family's reputation, but I could see the calculation behind her smile. James went along with everything, nodding like a puppet while his wife pulled the strings. Sarah began treating family gatherings like business meetings too, but in a different way. She'd arrive with folders full of gallery proposals, photos of paintings she wanted to purchase, budgets that never seemed to balance. Her art was beautiful, always had been, but running a business required different skills. Every month brought a new crisis that required immediate financial intervention. A featured artist backed out. The rent increased. Competition from online galleries. I kept writing checks, hoping the next one would be the last. The conversations at dinner grew strained, forced. Topics rotated between Diana's social climbing, James's legal victories, and Sarah's artistic struggles. Nobody asked about my work anymore, or how I was handling Margaret's absence, or what I thought about anything beyond how much I was willing to contribute to their latest venture. I became the family ATM, appreciated for what I could provide, but not particularly interesting as a person. Marcus noticed the change in our drives home. "You seem quiet after family dinners lately, Mr. Robert," he'd say gently. Marcus had been with us since Tommy was born, had watched the family dynamics shift over the years. He was too professional to comment directly, but I could see the concern in his eyes when he'd help me to the car after particularly tense evenings. Sometimes he'd take the long way home without asking, giving me time to decompress before facing the empty house. The breaking point came 3 months ago during Tommy's birthday party. Diana had organized an elaborate celebration at their country club, complete with pony rides and a magician. The guest list included every important family in their social circle, but somehow forgot to include Marcus's family, despite Tommy asking specifically if Marcus's daughter could come. "It's not appropriate," Diana had explained to James while I was standing right there. "We need to maintain certain standards." That night, I realized my daughter-in-law didn't just see me as a bank account. She saw everyone in my life as either useful or disposable, including the man who'd been more loyal to our family than our own blood. The lie came out of my mouth before I'd fully formed the thought. We were sitting around that polished table, the usual dance of small talk and subtle request beginning, when something inside me just snapped. Diana was describing her plans for redecorating their beach house, casually mentioning how a $50,000 budget would barely cover the basics. James was nodding along, and Sarah was calculating how much her next exhibition would cost. Nobody was looking at me. Nobody was seeing me. "I need to tell you all something," I said, setting down my fork with more force than necessary. The conversation stopped instantly. For the first time in months, I had their complete attention. "The business is in trouble, bad trouble. I'm bankrupt." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and I watched their faces change in real time. James went pale. Sarah's mouth fell open. But Diana actually laughed. It wasn't a nervous giggle or a sound of disbelief. It was genuine amusement, like I'd told her the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Oh, Robert," she said, wiping her eyes delicately, "you're being dramatic again. You can't be serious." She looked around the dining room, gesturing at the crystal and china. "This doesn't look like bankruptcy to me." James shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. My own daughter-in-law found my supposed financial ruin entertaining. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah recovered first, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Dad, what happened? How bad is it?" There was genuine concern in her voice, but I could already see her mind working, calculating how this would affect her gallery funding. James cleared his throat, straightened his tie, shifted into lawyer mode. "We need to look at your assets, Dad. Maybe there's a way to restructure, protect what we can." Protect what we can, not protect me. Protect what we could salvage from the wreckage of my supposed failure. Tommy, bless him, was the only one who seemed to understand what bankruptcy might mean for a person, not just a portfolio. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "does this mean you're sad?" Out of the mouths of babes. Yes, Tommy, I was sad. Sadder than I'd been since Margaret died. But not because of money, because I was sitting in a room full of people who shared my blood, and I felt completely alone. The dinner ended abruptly after that. Diana made excuses about having another appointment, though it was 8 o'clock on a Sunday evening. James mumbled something about calling me later to discuss options, but his eyes were already distant, already calculating how to protect his own interests. Sarah hugged me goodbye, whispered that we'd figure something out together, but I could feel her tension. The gallery needed money next month, and now her primary investor was claiming to be broke. As they filed out of the dining room, making awkward promises to talk soon, I sat alone at Margaret's table and wondered what I'd really learned from my little experiment. Diana's laughter echoed in my mind, but it was the silence from the others that hurt most. Not one of them had asked if I was okay. Not one had offered anything beyond financial planning. They were willing to help manage my crisis, but not willing to share it with me. I'd raised children who could calculate the impact of my failure, but couldn't comfort their father in his supposed moment of need. Marcus was waiting outside exactly where he'd said he'd be, leaning against the car in that patient way of his, probably reading one of those mystery novels he always kept in the glove compartment. When I walked out of the house 45 minutes earlier than usual, he straightened up immediately, concern crossing his face. He'd been my driver long enough to read the signs. Early departure meant trouble inside. "Ready to head home, Mr. Robert?" he asked, opening the rear door. But I couldn't get in that car yet. Couldn't sit in that quiet space with my thoughts. Instead, I found myself telling him what I'd done, the lie about bankruptcy, Diana's laughter, the family's reaction. Marcus listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail I shared. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised me completely. He walked around to the trunk, opened it, and pulled out a small brown bag. "Mr. Robert," he said, "I packed an extra dessert tonight. Rosa made her famous chocolate cake, and Maria always sends extra for my lunch tomorrow, but you look like you could use something sweet right now." He handed me that paper bag like it contained treasure instead of leftover cake. I stared at that simple offering, and something broke loose in my chest. Here was a man who had no idea whether my story was true or not, who had heard me claim financial ruin, and his first instinct was to share what little he had. No calculations, no concerns about how my situation might affect him. Just human kindness, offered without condition or expectation. "Marcus," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, "you know if I really was bankrupt, I couldn't keep paying your salary, right?" He smiled then, that genuine smile that had been brightening my days for 15 years. "Mr. Robert, you gave me a chance when nobody else would. Ex-cons don't usually get jobs driving around wealthy men's grandchildren. You trusted me with your family. Money comes and goes, but trust, that's worth more than any paycheck." We stood there in my son's driveway, a wealthy businessman and his driver sharing chocolate cake from a paper bag. Marcus told me about the months after his release from prison, when he couldn't find work anywhere. How I'd been the only employer willing to look past his record and see the man he was trying to become. He'd never forgotten that chance, never taken it for granted. While my own family treated my generosity as an entitlement, this man had spent 15 years earning my trust every single day. The drive home was different that night. Instead of the usual comfortable silence, Marcus and I talked, really talked, maybe for the first time in all those years. He told me about his daughter starting her second year of college, how proud he was that she'd made Dean's List. How his wife Maria had been taking night classes to become a nurse. How they'd saved every penny to buy their little house, never asking for advances or loans, just working steadily toward their goals. Their pride in their independence made me think about my children's dependence on me. And I realized I'd been enabling weakness while Marcus had been quietly demonstrating strength. The truth about my lie lasted exactly 3 days. I should have known Diana would do her research. She had connections in the business community, friends married to other contractors and investors. By Wednesday morning, she'd made enough calls to confirm that Hartwell Construction was not only solvent, but had just landed its biggest contract in company history. The phone call came during my morning coffee, her voice sharp with accusation. "I know what you did, Robert," she said without preamble. "The bankruptcy story was a test, wasn't it? You were testing us." There was no embarrassment in her voice, no shame about her reaction, just anger at being deceived. "How dare you manipulate us like that? Put us through that emotional turmoil just to satisfy some paranoid fantasy about our motives." I let her talk, let her work herself into a righteous fury about my deception. When she finally paused for breath, I asked her a simple question. "Diana, what emotional turmoil are you referring to? Because from where I was sitting, you seemed to find my supposed ruin pretty amusing." The silence on the other end was telling. She couldn't explain away her laughter, couldn't rewrite that moment of cruel amusement. James called an hour later, his lawyer's voice carefully controlled. "Dad, Diana told me about your experiment. I need you to understand how inappropriate that was. We're your family. We deserve honesty, not manipulation." I agreed with him. Families do deserve honesty. So I gave him some. I told him about the 2 years since his mother's death, about feeling like a stranger at our own dinner table, about watching my children become transaction partners instead of family members. Sarah's reaction surprised me most. She came over that evening, portfolio in hand as usual, but instead of launching into her standard presentation about gallery needs, she sat down and cried. Real tears, not the calculated kind Diana had mastered. "Dad," she said, "I failed your test, didn't I? I was thinking about money before I was thinking about you." At least she was honest about it. At least she could see what had happened. That night, I sat in Margaret's garden with Marcus helping me plant her favorite roses. It had become our Wednesday evening ritual after he officially ended his workday. He'd change out of his driver's uniform into old clothes and help me maintain the parts of the property that connected me to my late wife. We worked in comfortable silence mostly, but that evening I found myself talking about the family reactions. Marcus listened while he carefully tended a particularly stubborn rose bush that had been struggling since the winter. "You know, Mr. Robert," he said finally, "my grandmother used to say that crisis doesn't change people. It just shows you who they always were." He was right, of course. Diana had always been calculating. Bankruptcy just made her calculations visible. James had always been emotionally distant. My crisis just revealed how wide that distance had grown. And Sarah had always been self-absorbed, just usually in more charming ways. But Marcus had always been kind, always been loyal, always been grateful. My fake crisis hadn't changed him because he didn't need changing. He was exactly who I thought he was, exactly who he'd shown himself to be for 15 years. Sometimes the people who matter most aren't the ones sharing your last name. Sometimes they're the ones sharing your daily journey, quietly demonstrating what loyalty looks like when nobody's watching. 3 weeks have passed since that Sunday dinner, and I've learned more about family than 40 years of raising children ever taught me. Real family isn't about blood or legal documents or shared last names. It's about who shows up when showing up is hard. It's about who offers their dessert when you're hungry, who shares your burdens when you're weak, who sees your worth beyond your wallet. Marcus doesn't know it yet, but I've been having conversations with my attorney about more than just business succession planning. A man who's spent 15 years being more family than my family deserves recognition for that loyalty. His daughter's college tuition is covered through graduation. His wife's nursing program is funded. Their mortgage will be paid off by Christmas. Not charity, investment in people who've invested in me. As for my actual children, well, that's more complicated. James and I had lunch yesterday, just the two of us for the first time in years. He apologized for his reaction, claimed he was just trying to protect the family assets. We're working on rebuilding something real, something not based on financial transactions. Sarah stopped by with paintings instead of portfolios, wanting to show me her art rather than sell it to me. These are small steps, but they're honest ones. Diana and I have reached an understanding. She knows I see her clearly now, and she knows the family bank is closed to her schemes. James is finally starting to see her differently too. Marriage counseling was my suggestion, not his request. We'll see if they can build something genuine or if she'll move on to easier targets. Either way, my son is learning to distinguish between love and manipulation. The Sunday dinners continue, but they're different now. Smaller sometimes. Just Tommy and me working on model airplanes while Marcus helps Rosa in the kitchen. His family joins us occasionally, Maria bringing homemade tamales, their daughter sharing college stories with Tommy. These gatherings feel more like family than those formal affairs ever did. Laughter comes easier when people are there because they want to be, not because they need something. Tommy asked me last week if I was still sad about being bankrupt. I told him the truth, that I was never really bankrupt, just testing something. He thought about this seriously, then asked, "Grandpa, did you pass the test?" Smart kid. I'm still figuring out the answer to that question. But I know who passed with flying colors, and I know who failed completely. More importantly, I know the difference now. Tell me, have you ever discovered that the people you thought were closest to you were really the furthest away? Have you found family in unexpected places with people who earned your trust instead of inherited it? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if this tale of discovering true loyalty touched something in you, subscribe to Grandpa's Diaries. I've got more truth to tell, and maybe we can figure out this complicated business of human relationships together. Life's too short to waste on people who only love your checkbook.